In this video, we're going to start discussing unemployment, so chapter 30. So right now what we're going to do is just look at some definitions, some basic terms. We'll also look at how to calculate an unemployment rate. So let's just go ahead and get started. All right, so to be considered unemployed, all right, it's not just that you don't have a job, all right? So unemployed workers are adults who do not have a job but who are looking for work. Right. So again, just because someone does not have a job does not make them unemployed. Right? The criteria, well, there are a couple of other criteria that we're going to talk about, but one of the big ones is that they have to be looking for work. Right, there are some other conditions to be considered unemployed, especially as it pertains to calculating an unemployment rate. All right, so to be considered unemployed, all right, you have to be an adult, as it said in the definition. All right, that's considered 16 years old or older. So if you have to be at least 16 to be included in the unemployment rate calculation. All right. An individual must not be institutionalized. All right, so they can't be in, either jail, prison, or a medical facility in which they're not allowed to leave. Right, so not institutionalized. Right, they also must be a civilian. All right. We do not include military personnel in these kinds of calculations. And then finally, as we said, the person must be looking for work. Right. So if you're not looking for work, really, if you don't meet any of these conditions, right, then you will not then you are not considered unemployed, right? So kind of, if you're institutionalized, right, you can't really be looking for a job because there are very few jobs that you can have in any of those kind of institutions, right? Civilian, really, if you're military personnel, then you are employed. They just don't count them as being kind of in the employed section, right? And then, of course, looking for work, right? And this is because you're not really considered, kind of some of the classic examples are a stay-at-home parent, right? They don't have a job technically, right? And so, but they're not considered unemployed, right? Because they're not looking for a job, right? They are doing something that they are meaning to, right? Full-time students. Again, if somebody's going to school full-time and they are not working at the same time, right? Well, they don't have a job, but they're not considered unemployed, right? Because they aren't looking for one, right? So you have to be looking for a job in order to be counted as unemployed. All right, next let's look at how we are going to calculate the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate is equal to the number of unemployed workers divided by the labor force times 100% to put it into a percentage. All right, so we've already kind of talked about how you would identify whether somebody is employed or unemployed or just not, or neither. All right, but let's talk a little bit about the labor force before we do an example. We really kind of have to, because if we don't know what the labor force is, we can't calculate the unemployment rate. Not labor face, that's not a thing. All right, so our labor force is equal to all of the employed workers plus all of the unemployed workers. All right, so the labor force is just everyone who is actively participating in the job market, all right, or the labor market. So if you're employed, obviously you're participating in the labor market because you have a job and you're exchanging your time and energy for wages or a salary, right? And if you're unemployed, you're still actively participating in the labor market because you are searching for a job. You're trying to get a job that is engaging with the labor market. All right, so that is what our labor force is. All right, it's the total number of employed and unemployed individuals. All right, so let's calculate the unemployment rate, and we're going to calculate the unemployment rate. So this is the real numbers, right? So this is unemployment rate for the U.S. May 2020. It's the most recent data they have out, and when I say they, that is the Bureau of Labor Statistics and data through what is known as the CPS, or the Current Population Survey. We can kind of think of it as a mini census between censuses, all right, to get, it's not as extensive, it doesn't look at everybody, all right, so it is very much kind of taking a sample size of the census, or a sample size of the American population, right, to get these numbers. All right, so May 2020, the number of employed individuals was 137.242 million. All right, so in May 2020, 137,242,000 people, right, were employed. All right, the number of unemployed individuals was 20.985 million. All right, so when we go to calculate our unemployment rate, right, that's equal to our unemployed, the number of unemployed individuals. So and we're going to drop the millions. We're just going to use the numbers because those we can just put those back on at the end. All right, so 20.985 in the numerator, and then the denominator, our labor force, we just need to add all of the people that are employed and all of the people that are unemployed together. All right, so 137.242 plus 20.985, and then we're going to multiply that all by 100%. All right, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and write this out a little bit more just so we can go ahead and get that labor force number. We're going to use it later on. We don't necessarily need to remember it, but go ahead and get it up there. So when we add up our employed and unemployed, we're going to get 158,227,000. All right, so if we're doing it in millions, 158.227. All right, again, we're going to multiply that by 100% to get this in a percentage. There's almost definitely going to be a point where I don't write that out, but a lot of these are given in percentages, and so all you need to do is just multiply what we're doing by 100 to get that. All right, so once we've put this into our calculator, we're going to see that we had an unemployment rate of 13.3% for May of 2020. All right, that is a very high unemployment rate. Of course, these are outstanding times. That's maybe not the right way to say it. All right, but this is a very abnormal unemployment rate in the U.S. Recently, and the reason that we have an unusual unemployment rate is because this is an unusual time period, right? With the coronavirus out there, that's really what's fueling that, all right? As a kind of comparison, May 2019, so a year ago from when this data was collected, or when this data was collected, there was an unemployment rate of 3.6%. All right, so from kind of 1 year to the next, we had a 10% increase in unemployment rate, but again, that's not very common. That's not going to happen a whole lot. The reason we saw such a drastic change is because of the coronavirus. If you look into the months preceding when everything started, kind of quarantines and whatnot started happening in the U.S., we had a very similar unemployment rate around 3 point something, right? So very similar to that 3.6 we had, last May, right? But that is how we would calculate the unemployment rate. All right, so pretty straightforward. All right, especially if we're just given the unemployed and the employed. If you are not given that, which you've got a homework question that it's not as clear cut as that, right? In that case, what we would do is we would need to figure out, right, how many people are unemployed, right? So just anybody without a job that's looking for one and that doesn't fit into categories like institutionalized, 15 years old or younger, military personnel, right? Then we could add that to the number of people that are employed to get our labor force, and we could find our unemployment rate like that, right? Now we will turn to some curious cases, all right? So we're talking about unemployment, all right, and unemployed people, but we're also going to talk about some workers or some categories of workers that don't fit that definition, all right, and don't meet those conditions, all right? And the first of which is going to be discouraged workers. All right, so discouraged workers are workers who have given up on looking for a job but who would still like to work. All right, so these kind of the idea of discouraged workers became very apparent during the recession. There was a very kind of long period of high unemployment, kind of skirting around the 10% mark, and so there were many people who just kind of looked for work and spent months and months or years out of a job and just gave up, right? Kind of said, there's nothing out there for me. I'm not going to find anything. I'm going to stop looking, right? Well, these individuals, right, these discouraged workers, they are not included in the unemployment rate calculation, right? Because they aren't looking for work, they do not count as unemployed workers, right? And so they don't get added into that unemployment rate calculation, right? So this kind of has two effects on the unemployment rate, right? One, when we first start having a lot of workers become discouraged, right? When we start having a lot more discouraged workers, right? They're no longer going to be included in the unemployment rate calculation, and so it's going to appear as though the unemployment rate is going down, right? So economists commented on this during the recession, saying, hey, we're seeing a drop in unemployment rate, which usually is an indication that the economy is getting stronger and kind of returning to its former kind of strength. But all the other economic indicators, right, we're saying we're still not doing great, right? Or you know, measures of the strength of the economy still showed that we were still feeling the effects of the recession, right? And the reason for that is because of these discouraged workers, right? So as they were becoming discouraged, as they were just ending their search for employment, the unemployment rate dropped, and kind of is a little misleading, right? Because arguably these discouraged workers should have been accounted for in some way. Right now, that's difficult to do, and there's, just like with GDP and the reasons, you know, the kind of problems with it, there's a reason that they don't include that stuff, right? It would be really hard to find all these discouraged workers. So they are not included, but that can lead us to have a kind of an unemployment rate that maybe doesn't quite tell the whole story as far as employment in the country, right? If those discouraged workers were included, that unemployment rate would be higher, right, and would show kind of a better picture of this is how many people are wanting to work but can't. Right. They also, when we get to the end of something like the recession, they also have another effect, right? When kind of as the economy began strengthening after the recession, economists noticed that even though a lot of things were on the upswing, one thing that also started to rise that it probably shouldn't was the unemployment rate. Right, so in kind of a time of economic prosperity, you would expect the unemployment rate to be lower, right? But as we were kind of climbing out of that recession, right, the unemployment rate had dipped and started to go back up, right? And that's because all of the discouraged workers who were not being included in the unemployment rate were now actually looking for jobs. The economy was getting better. They thought that they had an actual shot at finding a job, so they actually began actively looking for one, and that led to a bump in the unemployment rate. All right, so discouraged workers, initially, they're going to, when they get discouraged and they stop looking for a job, they are going to cause the unemployment rate to drop. And when the economy picks back up and these discouraged workers decide to start looking for work again, they are going to bring the unemployment rate back up until they've found a job. All right, the next type is underemployed workers. All right, so underemployed workers are workers who are not fully employed. All right, that's a little bit like using a word to define the word itself. So let's talk a little bit about what this means. All right, so workers who are not fully employed. So really, there are two broad categories of types of underemployed workers. All right, so there are those who have part-time work but would like full-time. So they're not fully employed to their wishes, right? They would like more hours. They would like to be a full-time worker. So that is kind of one way somebody could be underemployed. The other way is if the kind of skills and it gets just skills, all right? The skills that a person has, all right, the training, right, the background, whatever you want to call it, right, doesn't match their position, all right? Again, we saw a lot of this as well during the recession, right? Companies kind of cutting back hours, all right, moving their employees from full-time to part-time so that they could keep more people on, even if everyone kind of had to take a pay cut, right? Or not really a pay cut, but as far as, you know, they don't get those extra hours, right? To be full-time. And then also a lot of people who had different, you know, qualifications, but just could not find a job. The market was so competitive that they ended up having to take jobs that were kind of below their pay grade, if you could say. All right. There was a guy that I knew, went to church with my father, who had been working for kind of an electronics type company. I think it was IBM, but I'm not certain. I'm not telling you his name, so you couldn't fact check me anyways. But he had been working there for a very long time. He had been working there for so long that he did not have a degree. He had a high school diploma, and he started working when that was okay, and that was all you didn't really need anything else, right? But his experience, you know, obviously he'd been working this job for decades, right? Well, when the recession hit, he was laid off, and he eventually started driving a school bus, right? And, you know, probably with his qualifications, with his knowledge, with his experience, right, he probably could have done a perfectly good job doing something like that, right? But partially because of the way the economy was going at that time, and just changes in what kind of employers expect as far as education and whatnot, he was not fully employed, right? Going from a full-time job as essentially an engineer to a part-time job as a bus driver, right? That's going to be someone who's underemployed. All right, so that is going to be it for this video. In the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at the different types of unemployment, right? We may or may not get through all of them in one video, but we're at least going to start looking at those in the next video. But I will see you guys then.